In 1944, American engineers figured out how to make a 2,000 horsepower engine breathe at 30,000 feet. They bolted a massive gear-driven air compressor directly to the crankshaft of a fighter plane. When the pilot pushed the throttle, the power was violent, instantaneous, and unstoppable. But today, that legendary technology is completely dead in modern aviation. This is supercharger versus turbo, why we abandoned World War II's greatest engine tech. Modern aviation threw away the instant gear-crushing power of the mechanical supercharger and replaced it with the turbocharger, a system that relies on hot leftover exhaust gas and suffers from frustrating turbo lag. Why did we abandon the most rugged, battle-tested breathing machine ever bolted to an airframe? The answer is hidden in the brutal physics of thin air and a parasitic drain that was secretly stealing hundreds of horsepower from our greatest fighters. We traded an unbreakable mechanical link for a delicate thermodynamic balancing act. So, which system is actually superior when you are fighting for oxygen in the flight levels? At the heart of the altitude war is a simple, merciless equation. Air density, Rho, as every engineer and every pilot knows, is the mass of air per cubic meter. That is, Rho equals P divided by the product of R and T. At sea level, standard pressure is 101,325 pascals and temperature is about 288 Kelvin. Plug that in and you get 1.225 kilograms per cubic meter. That is the number to tattoo on your brain, 1.225 full, thick, oxygen-rich air. But climb to 18,000 feet and the atmosphere turns traitor. Pressure drops to about 41,000 pascals, temperature falls to roughly 243 Kelvin, and the density collapses to 0.61 kilograms per cubic meter, less than half the oxygen molecules per breath. For an engine, that is like running a marathon with one lung tied off. A 300 horsepower engine, naturally aspirated, suddenly makes only 150 horsepower. The math is cold and unforgiving. Halve the density, halve the power. No amount of throttle can cheat the laws of physics. This is why forced induction exists. Without a supercharger or turbo, every climb is a slow suffocation. The numbers do not lie: 1.225 at sea level, 0.61 at 18,000 feet. Every horsepower beyond that is a fight against the thin air, and every solution, brute force or thermodynamic elegance, starts here with the density equation. Picture a 300 horsepower engine, the kind that roars on takeoff and pins you to the seat. At sea level, it breathes deep, every cylinder gulping down rich, heavy air. But climb to 18,000 feet, and the atmosphere turns thin as soup. The same engine, with the throttle jammed wide open, now musters only 150 horsepower. It isn't just a number on a spec sheet, it is the difference between a fighter clawing skyward and one gasping, powerless as the enemy slips away. The reason is brutal. An engine is nothing but an AIR pump. Power is proportional to mass flow, and mass flow is a slave to air density. Cut the density in half, and you cut the power in half. It doesn't matter how much fuel you dump in, if the air isn't there, the fire can't burn hotter. Look at the manifold pressure gauge. What once read 30 inches of mercury at full power now barely nudges 15. The needle falls, the pilot feels it in the stick, and the numbers on the altimeter become a countdown to irrelevance. This is the crisis that forced engineers to fight back with forced induction. They invented ways to stuff more air into the cylinders, to cheat the thin air of altitude. The battle for every lost horsepower starts here, with the physics of the air itself and the cold reality that, at altitude, even the mightiest engine is just an air pump struggling for breath. Crank open the cowling on a Pratt & Whitney R2800 and you're staring at a cathedral of American metalwork, gear teeth cut like clockwork, impeller blades shaped for war. The heart of the supercharger is a centrifugal impeller, a spinning disc with vanes flinging air outward at speeds that would make a jet engine blush. This isn't just a fan, it's a tornado in a can, driven straight off the engine's crankshaft by a gear train with a 2.5 to 1 ratio. For every revolution of the crank, the impeller spins 2.5 times faster. At full throttle, that means tip speeds brushing up against 20,000 revolutions per minute. Picture the edge of that impeller, aluminum alloy moving so fast it's nearly invisible, slicing through air at 300 meters per second. That's not theory, it's the sound of horsepower being manufactured in real time. The gears themselves are straight cut, built for strength, not silence. There is a whine when you slam the throttle, a mechanical howl that tells you you're making boost the old-fashioned way, by force. Manifold pressure climbs instantly, no waiting, no delay. You want 60 inches of mercury at the intake? Just ask. The gear train delivers torque to the impeller, and the impeller delivers compressed air straight to the cylinders. That is why the Corsair could leap off a carrier deck or snap into a vertical climb. The supercharger's violence is always on tap. No waiting for exhaust to build, no spooling up. The instant you push that throttle, the whole system responds like a sledgehammer. But this mechanical miracle comes at a price. Every pound of boost costs real engine power. The gear-driven supercharger is a relentless tax collector, demanding hundreds of horsepower from the crankshaft just to keep the impeller spinning at those astronomical speeds. Yet in the heat of a dogfight, when lag is the difference between life and death, nothing beats the brute force of a direct drive blower. This is the zero lag advantage, the supercharger's asymmetric weapon. It is the reason pilots trusted their lives to gears and blades, and why mechanics called it the muscle under the cowl. The physics are brutal, the engineering is beautiful, and the numbers are 2.5 to 1 gear ratio, 20,000 revolutions per minute tip speed, are the poetry of power in the age before turbines. Throttle forward, no hesitation, no drama, just raw mechanical violence. That is the memory that stuck with Corsair pilots. In the after-action logs from the Solomon Islands, you read the same line over and over. Manifold pressure surged instantly on throttle advance, no lag. It was not poetry, it was survival. When a zero slipped out of the sun and the stick went hard over, the difference between living and dying was measured in milliseconds. The gear-driven supercharger did not wait for exhaust to build or a turbine to spool. It was chained to the crankshaft, teeth locked, always hungry. The moment your hand slammed the throttle, the supercharger's impeller spun up, flinging air into the cylinders at tip speeds brushing 20,000 revolutions per minute. The manifold gauge, marked in inches of mercury, jumped from 30 to 60 in a heartbeat. Pilots called it the muscle under the cowl, mechanics called it the sledgehammer. One Corsair pilot wrote that you could feel it in your spine. Pull back, jam the throttle, and the engine just hurls you forward. No waiting, no spooling, just instant punch. The manifold pressure did not creep, it leapt. That was the asymmetric advantage, zero lag, zero mercy. In a carrier launch, with the deck pitching and the ocean hungry, you needed every pound of thrust right now. No turbocharger on Earth could match that response. Mechanics saw it too. After a hard sortie, they would pull the cowl and check the gear teeth, sometimes finding the faintest marks of stress, evidence of the violence inside. But the system held. Straight-cut gears, oil slicked and howling, turned the pilot's command into instant power. There is a moral weight to that kind of certainty. In the cockpit, knowing that every movement of your right hand is answered immediately and absolutely by the engine, that is trust. It is not a number on a spec sheet, it is the difference between catching the enemy in a vertical climb and watching him slip away while your boost builds. The supercharger's instant torque was not just a technical achievement, it was a lifeline, hammered out of steel and adrenaline that let American pilots fight on their own terms, one throttle slam at a time. Every engineer's nightmare starts with a number. At 30,000 feet, the air is so thin you can barely feel it on your face, let alone in a carburetor. The standard atmosphere chart says pressure is down to 30 inches of mercury, half what you get at sea level. Temperature is minus 30 degrees Celsius. Density, the real enemy, has collapsed to 0.46 kilograms per cubic meter. That is barely a third of the oxygen those cylinders crave. If you want to make sea-level power up here, you have to cheat the gods of physics. That means brute forcing more air into the engine than nature ever intended. The target is simple but merciless. 60 inches of mercury manifold pressure is the goal, double what the ambient air can provide. The math is unforgiving. To get there, you need a pressure ratio of about 2.0 just to break even. But combat engines like the R2800 did not settle for break even. They aimed higher, hunting for pressure ratios closer to 2.7. That is the only way to keep those 18 cylinders roaring at altitude with enough boost to claw through the stratosphere and keep a fighter in the fight. So let's lay out the variables. Ambient pressure at 30,000 feet is 30 inches of mercury. Desired manifold pressure is 60 inches. Pressure ratio required is 2.0 minimum, but real-world targets push closer to 2.7 to allow for losses, intercooler drop, and the need for overboost in combat emergencies. Every inch of mercury above ambient is a victory against entropy, but every bit of boost comes at a cost, either in horsepower siphoned off the crank or in the complexity of wrangling hot, high-velocity exhaust through a turbine. This is the equation that haunts every design sketch, every dyno run, every pilot's climb into the blue. The numbers are set. The only question is how much you are willing to pay for power at altitude. Now comes the gut punch. For all its instant violence, the gear-driven supercharger is a thief in the night, a necessary evil that robs the engine to pay itself. Every time you demand boost at altitude, the impeller does not spin for free. It is chained to the crankshaft, and that chain drags hard. At 30,000 feet, the numbers are brutal. About 500 horsepower, 1/4 of the R2800's rated output, is siphoned away just to keep the blower spinning fast enough to make pressure. That is not a rounding error. That is a whole fighter engine's worth of power, gone before it ever reaches the propeller. Engineers call it the parasitic tax. It is the price of brute force, mechanical power sacrificed to compress air that nature refuses to supply. You can see it on the manifold pressure gauge. Push the throttle and the needle leaps, but you know the engine is sweating, straining, burning extra fuel just to keep the supercharger alive. Every inch of mercury above ambient is a victory, but every inch is paid for in horsepower lost to the gears. This is not some theoretical penalty. It is measured, dyno-tested, confirmed in the field. Wartime reports from Wright Field and NA. CA spell it out. At high boost, the supercharger can swallow 400, 500, even 600 horsepower, depending on altitude and pressure ratio. Every pilot who ever watched the manifold gauge sag in a climb knew the truth. There is no such thing as free boost. The supercharger is both hero and parasite, a muscle man who eats his own weight in power just to stay in the fight. That is the betrayal at the heart of the altitude war. You win the battle for instant torque, but you bleed for it, every mile above the clouds. A turbocharger doesn't beg the crankshaft for power. Instead, it reaches straight into the exhaust stream, a torrent of wasted heat and pressure, and claims what the engine throws away. The turbine, forged from nickel-based alloys designed to survive a 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit onslaught, sits in the path of this fiery blast. Exhaust gases, expelled at rifle speed, hammer the turbine blades, spinning the shaft at 70,000 revolutions per minute. That's faster than most metals can endure, faster than a dentist's drill, and far beyond the limits of ordinary engineering. The shaft, glowing under stress and heat, connects directly to a compressor on the intake side. No mechanical drag, no horsepower borrowed from the crank. The turbocharger simply harvests what's already there, turning waste into compressed air. This is the quiet revolution of the turbo age, horsepower conjured from nothing but heat and speed. At altitude, where air thins and engines struggle, the turbo transforms what pilots once called hot trash into the power that keeps a fighter climbing and fighting. There's no parasitic loss, no gear whine, only the elegant efficiency of physics. The price is complexity and the need for metals that won't melt or shatter at those speeds. Each turbine blade is a metallurgist's triumph, surviving temperatures that would reduce steel to liquid. Oil film bearings, polished to perfection, let the shaft spin nearly frictionless, riding the edge between performance and destruction. The numbers are staggering. In a P-47, the turbo's turbine spins at 70,000 revolutions per minute, glowing cherry red as it recycles exhaust heat into a pressure ratio approaching 3:1. Exhaust gas temperatures can top 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than a blast furnace. Still, the system endures, sortie after sortie, because the energy it taps is fundamentally free. The wastegate, acting as the turbo's brain, regulates this inferno with watchmaker precision, holding boost exactly where it is needed. No crankshaft connection, no mechanical tacks, just fire, captured and put to work. This isn't brute force, it's thermodynamic alchemy. The turbo refuses to let energy slip away, keeping fighters roaring at 30,000 feet long after others fade. Turbochargers offered something no mechanical supercharger could: the power to turn waste heat into altitude. But that power came with a pause. In the P-47 Thunderbolt, the turbocharger was buried deep in the fuselage, its turbine waiting for the exhaust to build. Push the throttle at high altitude and you would feel it, a 1 or 2 second lag before the boost arrived. The wastegate, a pressure-sensitive valve, controlled the flow, opening and closing with careful precision to keep boost steady at 60 or even 70 inches of mercury. But it could never react instantly. Pilots learned to live with this delay. In a dogfight, those seconds stretched out, the difference between escape and disaster. Lieutenant Gabreski of the 56th Fighter Group called it waiting for the punchline in a joke you might not survive. The answer was not brute force, but anticipation, advancing the throttle early, letting the wastegate and turbine catch up before the maneuver began. Timing became everything. The P-38 Lightning doubled down, fitting a turbo to each Allison V 1710 engine. Twin systems brought redundancy and smoother transitions, but the lag remained, especially up high. P-38 pilots learned to move both throttles in unison, coaxing the turbos awake before a climb or dive. After-action reports spoke of chasing the lag, timing every move so the wastegates would be ready when the fight demanded full power. Once the turbos were lit, the P-38 could hold 30,000 feet with ease, long after rivals had fallen away. In the labs, General Electric engineers worked late, sleeves rolled and hands stained with graphite, chasing every fraction of a second. They trimmed wastegate actuation times, improved bearings, and coated turbine blades to survive the 1,600-degree heat. By 1944, turbo lag was down to a predictable beat or two, a tactical disadvantage in a close fight, but a thermodynamic win at altitude. The trade was clear, a moment's hesitation for a river of free horsepower where it counted. Pilots cursed the lag, engineers defended it. In the end, the turbo's way of recycling fire would outlast the brute force of gears. Today's sky belongs to turbos, wastegate-controlled, fire-breathing alchemists turning exhaust into pure manifold pressure. The brute force of superchargers made legends, but their parasitic appetite sealed their fate. As we chase efficiency at altitude, every new engine answers the same old question: horsepower or heat? In aviation, the winner is whoever wastes the least. Drop your verdict below: brute strength or thermodynamic finesse.